A millionaire boss dined at his maid's humble home, but what he learned that night changed everything. Before we explore all the details of this incredible story, tell us where you're following us from and the time. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a thing, and let's embark on this journey together. She never thought a simple dinner invitation would change everything, but sometimes the most dangerous words are the ones spoken from the heart. The marble floors of the penthouse gleamed under the soft afternoon light, each surface reflecting Amara Hayes' careful movements as she dusted the already spotless furniture. At 29, she had perfected the art of being invisible, efficient, quiet, present only when needed. Her dark skin caught the light streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows, but she moved through the luxury around her like a ghost, untouched by its grandeur. 3 years. 3 years of cleaning this cold palace, of straightening cushions that never showed wrinkles, of polishing surfaces that rarely bore fingerprints. The penthouse belonged to Ronan Bellamy, a man who lived like a machine, precise, calculated, emotionally distant. She knew his routines better than her own. Black coffee at 6 a.m., protein shake at noon, work calls that lasted until midnight. Ms. Hayes, his voice cut through the silence, professional and measured as always. Amara turned, her cleaning cloth still in hand. Ronan stood in the doorway of his home office, his tall frame filling the space. Even at the end of a long day, his navy suit remained impeccable, his dark hair perfectly styled. Everything about him spoke of control, of a life lived within carefully drawn lines. "Yes, Mr. Bellamy? The dinner tonight has been cancelled. The security system malfunctioned, and my guests—" He paused, something flickering across his face. Was it disappointment? "Well, they've made other arrangements." She nodded, returning to her dusting. This was their relationship. Brief exchanges, practical communication, nothing more. But as she watched him from the corner of her eye, she noticed something different. He remained in the doorway, his usual confidence replaced by something she'd never seen before. Uncertainty. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words. Ronan's fingers drummed against the doorframe, a nervous habit she'd observed only during his most stressful business calls. For the first time in 3 years, he seemed human. "Mr. Bellamy?" she ventured, setting down her cloth. "Are you all right?" He looked surprised by the question, as if no one had asked him that in years. Yes, just tired, I suppose." Another silence. But this one felt different, charged with possibility. Amara took a breath, her heart pounding as she prepared to cross a line she'd never crossed before. "If you want," she said, her voice steady despite her racing pulse, "there's still dinner at my place. It's not sophisticated, but it's real." The words hung in the air between them, dangerous and honest. She immediately regretted them. What was she thinking? She was his employee. He was her boss. This was exactly the kind of boundary she'd sworn never to cross. But Ronan didn't respond with the cold dismissal she expected. Instead, he studied her face with an intensity that made her breath catch. His grey eyes, usually so calculating, held something she'd never seen before. Curiosity, maybe even longing. "Your place," he repeated slowly, as if testing the words. "My sister's making her famous roast chicken tonight," Amara continued, surprising herself. "Nothing fancy, just food, real food." She watched as something shifted in his expression. The walls he'd built around himself seemed to crack, just slightly. When was the last time someone had invited him somewhere without wanting something in return? When was the last time he'd eaten a meal that wasn't about business or networking? He started, then stopped. She could see the war playing out on his face, the businessman who kept everyone at arm's length versus the man who was tired of eating alone. "It's okay if you can't," she said quickly, giving him an out. "I understand you're busy." "What time?" he interrupted, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. Amara blinked, certain she'd misheard. "I'm sorry? What time should I be there?" Ronan asked. And for the first time in 3 years, she saw him smile. Not the polished smile he wore for business meetings, but something genuine, almost vulnerable. 7, she managed, her heart racing. 7 o'clock. He nodded, already moving toward his bedroom. "I'll need your address." As she wrote it down on a piece of paper, her hands trembling slightly, Amara wondered what she'd just done. She was inviting her millionaire boss, a man who probably hadn't eaten a home-cooked meal in years, to her tiny apartment in the suburbs, to meet her 17-year-old sister, to see how she really lived. "Ms. Hayes," Ronan said, taking the paper from her hands. Their fingers brushed for just a moment, and she felt electricity shoot up her arm. "Thank you." The way he said it, with such genuine gratitude, made her realize that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't the only one who was tired of being invisible. As she gathered her cleaning supplies and prepared to leave, Amara caught her reflection in the polished surface of his dining table. Tomorrow everything would go back to normal. Tomorrow they'd return to their careful dance of employer and employee, of boundaries and professional distance. But tonight was going to change everything. And as she walked toward the elevator, her heart pounding with anticipation and fear, Amara had no idea that the man watching her leave was about to discover something that would shatter everything he thought he knew about himself and about her. What happens when two different worlds collide over a simple dinner? Will Ronan's carefully controlled life survive the warmth of Amara's real world? He had eaten at the finest restaurants in the world, but nothing had prepared him for the taste of home. The GPS in Ronan's BMW guided him through neighborhoods he'd never seen before, each mile taking him further from the gleaming towers of downtown into a world that felt entirely foreign. Modest houses lined the streets, their small front yards filled with children's toys and garden hoses. Porch lights flickered on as dusk settled over the suburban landscape, creating pockets of warmth in the growing darkness. He parked outside 1247 Maple Street, a small two-story house with peeling paint and a front door that had seen better days. The contrast to his penthouse was stark. Where his world was all clean lines and expensive materials, this place breathed with lived-in authenticity. A wind chime hung from the porch, its gentle melody carried by the evening breeze. For a moment, Ronan sat in his car, questioning his decision. What was he doing here? He who had turned down invitations from senators and celebrities was about to have dinner in a house that probably cost less than his monthly car payment. But something deeper than logic had driven him here, a hunger he couldn't name. The front door opened before he could knock. A young woman who looked like a younger version of Amara stood in the doorway, her natural hair pulled back in a colorful headband, her smile warm and genuine. "You must be Mr. Bellamy," she said, extending her hand. "I'm Zara, Amara's sister. She's told me absolutely nothing about you, which means you're probably important." Ronan found himself smiling at her directness. "Just Ronan, please." "Well, just Ronan. You picked a good night. Amara's been cooking since she got home, and when my sister cooks, she cooks like she's feeding an army." He followed Zara inside, immediately struck by the warmth that enveloped him. The house was small but filled with life. Family photos covered the walls. A worn but comfortable couch sat in front of a television that was actually being used, and from the kitchen came the sound of something sizzling in a pan, accompanied by the low hum of R&B music. "Amara!" Zara called out. "Your mysterious guest is here." Amara emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel. She'd changed from her work clothes into a simple sundress that brought out the richness of her skin. Without her usual reserved demeanor, she looked younger, more relaxed, and absolutely beautiful. "Hi," she said, suddenly shy. "I hope you found the place okay." "Your directions were perfect," Ronan replied, though he couldn't take his eyes off her. This was Amara as he'd never seen her. Not the efficient housekeeper, but a woman in her own space, surrounded by love and comfort. "Come on," Zara said, grabbing his arm with the familiarity of someone who'd never learned to be intimidated by wealth. "Let me show you around while Amara finishes terrorizing that chicken." The tour took all of 3 minutes. The house was tiny by his standards. A living room, kitchen, 2 bedrooms, and a bathroom. But every inch was carefully maintained, decorated with items that clearly held meaning rather than monetary value. A hand-knitted throw draped over the couch, children's artwork from what must have been Zara's younger years, books stacked on every available surface. "It's not much," Amara said, appearing beside them, "but it's ours." "It's perfect," Ronan said, and meant it. When was the last time he'd been in a place that felt like a home rather than a showcase? They gathered around a small dining table that had been set with mismatched plates and cloth napkins. The meal was simple: roasted chicken seasoned with herbs, rice and beans, a salad made with vegetables from what Amara proudly announced was their backyard garden. But as Ronan took his first bite, he realized he couldn't remember the last time food had tasted this good. "So," Zara said, pointing her fork at him, "what's your story? And don't give me some corporate bio. I want the real stuff." "Zara," Amara warned, but Ronan held up a hand. "No, it's fine," he said, though he struggled to know where to begin. "How did you explain a life lived entirely in boardrooms and investment portfolios?" I work in pharmaceuticals, research and development mostly." "That's the corporate bio," Zara said, unimpressed. "I asked for the real stuff. Like, what do you do for fun? What makes you laugh? When was the last time you did something just because it felt good?" The questions hit him like physical blows. When was the last time he'd done something just for joy? When had he last laughed, really laughed, at something other than a competitor's misfortune? He started, then stopped. The silence stretched, but it wasn't uncomfortable. Somehow in this small kitchen with these two women, honesty felt possible. "I don't remember," he admitted finally. Amara and Zara exchanged a look, and he saw something pass between them, not pity, but understanding. They didn't judge him for his emptiness, they simply accepted it. "Well," Zara said, raising her glass of sweet tea, "here's to remembering." They clinked glasses, and Ronan felt something shift inside his chest. As the evening wore on, he found himself relaxing in ways he hadn't in years. Zara told stories about her senior year in high school, her dreams of becoming a nurse. Amara shared memories of their childhood, the sacrifices she'd made to keep their family together after their parents died. "She basically raised me," Zara said, reaching over to squeeze her sister's hand. "Gave up her own dreams so I could have mine." "What dreams?" Ronan asked gently. Amara looked uncomfortable. "It doesn't matter, that was a long time ago." "She wanted to be a teacher," Zara said, ignoring her sister's warning look. "Still does, if she'd admit it." As the night deepened, Ronan helped clear the table, despite Amara's protests. Standing in their small kitchen, washing dishes side by side, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Peace. The conversation flowed easily, punctuated by comfortable silences and shared laughter. "Thank you," he said as they finished the last of the dishes. "For what?" "For this. For—" He gestured around the kitchen, struggling to find words. "For letting me remember what this feels like." Amara studied his face, and he saw something shift in her expression, a recognition perhaps of the loneliness he'd been carrying. "You're welcome here any time," she said softly. As he prepared to leave, Zara hugged him goodbye like they were old friends. "Don't be a stranger, okay? And next time bring your appetite. Amara makes the best banana pudding you've ever tasted." Driving home through the quiet streets, Ronan's mind reeled with the evening's revelations. He'd gone to dinner expecting to make polite conversation and leave. Instead, he'd been given a glimpse of something he'd forgotten existed: authentic connection, unconditional warmth, the simple pleasure of being accepted for who he was rather than what he owned. And as he pulled into his building's parking garage, surrounded once again by concrete and steel, Ronan Bellamy realized that for the first time in years, he didn't want to be alone. Monday morning arrived with the weight of unspoken words and the dangerous realization that some lines once crossed can never be uncrossed. The elevator ride to the penthouse felt different. Amara stood in the familiar space, her cleaning supplies arranged in their usual order, but everything had changed. The memory of Saturday night lingered in the air between them, the warmth of her kitchen, the sound of Ronan's genuine laughter, the way he'd looked at her when she'd said he was welcome any time. Professional distance. That's what she needed to maintain. Saturday had been an anomaly, a moment of kindness that meant nothing more than simple human decency. She was his employee, he was her boss, and that's all they could ever be. But as the elevator doors opened, those careful resolutions crumbled. Ronan stood in the kitchen, not his usual spot by the coffee machine, but leaning against the counter as if he'd been waiting for her. He'd loosened his tie, rolled up his sleeves, and there was something different about his posture. Less rigid, more accessible. "Good morning, Ms. Hayes," he said, but his voice carried a warmth that hadn't been there before. "Good morning, Mr. Bellamy." She kept her eyes down, focusing on unpacking her supplies. Professional distance. "I'll start with the office today, if that's all right." "Actually," he said, and she could hear him moving closer, "I was hoping we could talk." Her hand stilled on the vacuum cord. "Is there a problem with my work?" "No, nothing like that." He was quiet for a moment, and she could feel him struggling with something. "I wanted to thank you. For Saturday. I haven't—" He paused, and she risked a glance up at him. "I haven't felt that relaxed in years." The sincerity in his voice made her chest tighten. "It was just dinner, Mr. Bellamy." "Was it?" The question hung between them, loaded with implications neither of them was ready to address. She busied herself with arranging her cleaning supplies, anything to avoid looking at him. "I should really get started. You have that conference call at 10. "Amara." Her name on his lips stopped her cold. Not Ms. Hayes, not the formal distance he'd maintained for 3 years. Just her name, spoken with a gentleness that made her breath catch. "Yes?" I know this is complicated, but I'd like to take you to dinner, a real dinner, as a thank you. She finally looked up at him, seeing the uncertainty in his grey eyes. This wasn't the commanding businessman she'd worked for. This was a man asking, not demanding. A man who looked genuinely nervous about her answer. Mr. Bellamy, I don't think— Please, he interrupted. Just think about it. Before she could respond, his phone buzzed. Business calling him back to his world of meetings and million-dollar decisions. But as he answered the call, his eyes never left hers. The rest of the morning passed in a strange dance of awareness. Ronan worked from home, which was unusual, and she found herself hyper-aware of his presence. When she cleaned the living room, she could feel him watching her from his office. When she organized his kitchen, he found reasons to walk through, making coffee he didn't drink, checking appliances that didn't need checking. Around noon, she was dusting the bookshelf in his office when he spoke. You know, I've been thinking about what Zara said, about you wanting to be a teacher. Amara's hand stilled on the leather-bound volume she'd been cleaning. That was a long time ago. Why did you give it up? She turned to face him, surprised by the genuine curiosity in his voice. Life happened. Zara needed stability. Dreams don't pay rent. But you still want it. It wasn't a question. What I want doesn't matter anymore. She returned to her dusting, but her movements were more aggressive now. Some people get to follow their dreams. Others take care of the people they love. What if you could do both? Something in his tone made her stop. What do you mean? He leaned back in his chair, studying her with that intense focus she'd seen him use during business negotiations. I've been thinking about expanding my company's educational outreach programs. We need someone to coordinate community partnerships, someone who understands both the business side and the human side. Mr. Bellamy, the salary would be triple what you're making now, full benefits, and we'd pay for you to finish your education degree. The cleaning cloth slipped from her fingers. Why? Because you're wasted here, he said simply. You have a mind, Amara. You have insights, ideas. I see it in the way you organize everything, the way you think through problems. You deserve more than this. And what would you get out of it? She asked, her voice sharper than she intended. A grateful employee who owes you everything. Something flickered across his face. Hurt, maybe, or disappointment. Is that what you think this is about? I don't know what this is about. She picked up the cloth, needing something to do with her hands. Saturday night was lovely, but it doesn't change anything. I'm still your employee. You're still my boss, and job offers don't come without strings. What if I told you there were no strings? Then I'd say you're lying. The words came out harsher than she intended, but she couldn't take them back. Men like you don't do favors for women like me without expecting something in return. The silence that followed was deafening. When she finally looked up, she saw something she'd never seen in Ronan Bellamy's eyes before. Pain. Real, raw pain. I see, he said quietly. I apologize for overstepping. He turned back to his computer, effectively dismissing her. But instead of relief, Amara felt something that might have been regret. She'd protected herself, maintained those professional boundaries, but the cost felt higher than she'd expected. The rest of the day passed in uncomfortable silence. Ronan stayed in his office, taking calls and avoiding the areas where she was working. She should have been grateful for the return to their previous dynamic, but instead, she felt like she'd lost something precious. At 5 o'clock, she packed her supplies and headed for the door, but Ronan's voice stopped her. Amara. She turned, seeing him standing in the hallway, his hands shoved in his pockets. The confident businessman was gone, replaced by someone who looked almost vulnerable. For what it's worth, he said, Saturday night wasn't about gratitude or obligation. It was about feeling human again, and I'm sorry if I made you uncomfortable. Before she could respond, he was gone, disappearing into his office and closing the door behind him. As the elevator descended toward the lobby, Amara stared at her reflection in the polished metal doors. She'd done the right thing, protected herself from a situation that could only end badly. So why did she feel like she was the one who'd been cruel? And as she walked out into the afternoon sun, she couldn't shake the feeling that she'd just made the biggest mistake of her life. Sometimes the hardest person to forgive is yourself, especially when you realize you've been running from the very thing you need most. The grocery store on Wednesday evening was crowded with people picking up dinner ingredients, families navigating narrow aisles with crying toddlers, teenagers working part-time jobs they'd rather not have. Amara moved through the familiar chaos with practiced efficiency, her mind focused on stretching $27 into meals for the rest of the week. She was comparing prices on pasta sauce when she heard a familiar voice behind her. Excuse me, do you know where I might find actual food? Amara turned to find Ronan standing in the middle of the aisle, looking completely out of place in his tailored suit among the everyday shoppers. He held a small basket, containing what appeared to be a single banana and a bottle of expensive, sparkling water. Mr. Bellamy. Her voice came out smaller than she'd intended. They hadn't spoken since Monday's confrontation, their Tuesday interactions limited to polite nods and careful avoidance. Ronan, he corrected gently, and I'm serious about the food question. I realized yesterday that I have no idea how to shop for actual meals. Despite everything, she almost smiled. That's actual food, she said, nodding toward his basket. This is what I grabbed in panic when I realized I was hungry and had nothing at home except protein powder and yesterday's takeout. He looked around the store with the bewildered expression of someone who'd never had to consider the price of milk. I thought maybe if I wandered around long enough, inspiration would strike. How's that working for you? Terribly. I've been here 45 minutes and this banana is the result of my best decision-making. The absurdity of the situation, Ronan Bellamy, millionaire pharmaceutical executive, defeated by a grocery store, broke through her carefully maintained walls. What do you actually like to eat? He considered this with the seriousness of a business negotiation. I honestly don't know. I eat what's convenient, what's delivered, what's served at meetings. I can't remember the last time I thought about what I actually wanted. Something in his admission tugged at her heart. Here was a man who could buy anything he wanted, but had forgotten how to want anything at all. Come on, she said, making a decision she'd probably regret. I'll show you. For the next hour, Amara guided him through the basics of grocery shopping. She explained how to pick fresh vegetables, showed him the difference between various cuts of meat, taught him to read labels for more than just the price. Ronan listened with the intense focus he usually reserved for board meetings, asking questions about seasoning and cooking times as if he were negotiating a merger. The secret, she said, selecting onions with practiced ease, is to shop the perimeter first. Fresh stuff lives around the edges, the processed food lives in the middle. That's actually brilliant, he said, making a note in his phone. Like a business model, the real value is always at the foundation. She found herself laughing at his earnestness. You just compared grocery shopping to corporate strategy. Everything is strategy if you think about it, right? He said, but he was smiling too. Though I admit this is the first strategy session I've enjoyed in years. They were standing in the produce section, Ronan carefully examining tomatoes under her instruction, when he spoke again. Amara, about Monday, what I said, the job offer. You don't have to explain. Yes, I do. He set down the tomato and turned to face her fully. You were right to be suspicious. Not because I had ulterior motives, but because I didn't examine my own motivations carefully enough. She waited, sensing there was more. The truth is, I've been thinking about that position for months. We genuinely need someone with your skills and perspective. But when I offered it to you, it wasn't purely professional. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she'd never seen him make. I wanted to help you because you helped me, and that's not fair to either of us. What do you mean? You don't owe me anything, Amara. Saturday night was a gift you gave freely, and I shouldn't have tried to turn it into something transactional, even if my intentions were good. The honesty in his voice made her chest tight. And now? Now I think you should consider the position on its own merits. Interview with my HR director. Meet the team, see if it's something you'd actually want. No pressure from me, no obligation because of Saturday night. Just a job opportunity that happens to be perfect for someone with your abilities. She studied his face, looking for the catch, the hidden agenda. But all she saw was sincerity, and something that might have been hope. Why does this matter so much to you? She asked. He was quiet for a long moment, and she thought he might not answer. Then, because I spent Saturday night remembering what it felt like to be human. And Monday morning I went right back to being the man who forgot that people have dreams beyond their current circumstances. I don't want to be that man anymore. A child ran between them, chasing after he escaped cart, and the moment broke. But something had shifted in the space between them. Not the electric tension of attraction, but something deeper. Understanding, maybe. Recognition. I should probably get home, she said, glancing at her watch. Zara has a chemistry test tomorrow. Of course. He looked down at his basket, still containing only the banana and sparkling water. I should probably figure out what I'm doing with all this knowledge you've given me. Start simple, she advised. Pasta, tomato sauce, some vegetables. Hard to mess up, tastes better than takeout. Pasta, he repeated seriously, as if committing it to memory. As they walked toward the checkout lanes, Amara found herself stealing glances at him. Here was a man worth hundreds of millions of dollars, carefully calculating whether he needed the name-brand pasta sauce, actually considering her advice about generic versus brand-name products. The contrast between this Ronan and the one she cleaned for was startling. "Amara," he said as they reached the self-checkout machines, "that interview, would you at least think about it?" She looked at him, really looked. Saw past the expensive suit and the perfect haircut to the man who'd eaten her sister's cooking with genuine gratitude, who'd spent an hour learning to shop for groceries like it was the most important skill in the world. "I'll think about it," she said. His smile was radiant. "That's all I can ask." As she drove home with her own groceries, Amara couldn't stop thinking about the way Ronan had looked at a simple tomato, like it held the secrets of the universe. Maybe that's what happened when you spent your whole life in the artificial world of business. You forgot that the most important things were often the simplest ones. The invitation came on a Thursday morning, wrapped in formality, but carrying the weight of possibility, and the dangerous promise of a world she'd never dared imagine. The envelope sat on the kitchen counter of the penthouse like an elegant trap. Cream-colored paper, embossed letterhead, her name written in flowing script across the front. Amara had been staring at it for 10 minutes, her cleaning supplies forgotten on the marble island. "It's not going to bite," Ronan said from the doorway, startling her from her thoughts. She turned to find him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. He'd been different since their grocery store encounter, more present, more likely to engage in actual conversation, rather than the polite exchanges that had defined their relationship for 3 years. "What is it?" she asked, though part of her already knew. "An invitation to the Hartwell Foundation Gala tomorrow night. It's a fundraiser for educational initiatives in underserved communities." He moved closer, but maintained careful distance. "I thought you might like to see the kind of work we'd be doing if you decide to interview for the position." "Mr. Bellamy, Ronan," he corrected gently, "and before you say no, hear me out. This isn't a date. It's not me trying to blur professional lines. It's genuinely educational. You'd see our potential partners understand the scope of the programs we want to develop." She picked up the invitation, feeling the weight of expensive paper between her fingers. The Hartwell Foundation. She'd read about their work in the local paper. High-profile charity events attended by the city's elite, the kind of people who wrote checks with more zeros than she saw in a year. "I wouldn't fit in," she said simply. "You'd fit in better than anyone else there," Ronan replied with surprising intensity. "These people write checks and feel good about themselves. You actually understand what these communities need. I don't have anything to wear to something like this." "That's easily solved." He pulled out his phone, but she held up a hand. "I'm not letting you buy me a dress." "What if Zara picked it out? My treat, but her choice. She strikes me as someone who'd enjoy spending someone else's money on her sister." Despite herself, Amara smiled. "Zara would indeed love that opportunity. You've thought this through." "I'm good at strategy," he said, echoing their grocery store conversation. "And I really think you'd find it interesting. No pressure about the job, no expectations beyond showing up and observing." She studied his face, looking for hidden agendas, but found only genuine enthusiasm for his work and something that might have been hope that she'd say yes. "One condition," she said finally. "Name it. If I feel uncomfortable or out of place, I leave. No arguments, no persuasion." Agreed. That evening, Zara arrived at the penthouse with 3 garment bags and the kind of excitement usually reserved for lottery winners. "This is like Christmas, and my birthday rolled into one," she announced, hanging the bags in Amara's bedroom. "Do you know how long I've wanted to dress you up for something fancy?" "It's just a work event," Amara protested, but Zara was already unzipping the first bag. "This is not just a work event. This is you stepping into a whole different world." She pulled out a midnight blue dress that seemed to shimmer in the light. "And you're going to look absolutely stunning." An hour later, Amara barely recognized herself in the mirror. The dress fit perfectly, elegant without being revealing, sophisticated without being pretentious. Zara had insisted on doing her makeup and hair, creating a look that enhanced rather than disguised her natural beauty. "You look like royalty," Zara breathed, stepping back to admire her work. "I look like I'm playing dress-up," Amara replied, but she couldn't deny the confidence she felt in the reflection staring back at her. The gala was held in the ballroom of the city's most exclusive hotel. As Ronan escorted her through the entrance, Amara felt the weight of curious stares. She recognized some faces from the society pages, Politicians, business leaders, people whose charitable donations made headlines. "You're staring," Ronan murmured in her ear as they moved through the crowd. "So is everyone else," she replied, acutely aware of the attention they were drawing. "Let them stare." His voice held a note of protective pride that made her pulse quicken. "You belong here more than most of these people." The evening unfolded in a series of introductions and conversations that surprised her with their substance. Ronan introduced her simply as Amara Hayes, educational consultant, and she found herself discussing literacy programs with a state senator's wife, debating funding strategies with the head of a major non-profit, sharing insights about community engagement with a group of corporate executives. "You're a natural at this," said Dr. Helena Vance, the Foundation's director, during a quiet moment between speakers. "Ronan mentioned you might be joining his team. I hope you'll consider it seriously. We need more people who understand both the challenges and the potential." As the evening progressed, Amara began to relax. These weren't just wealthy people writing checks. Many of them were genuinely committed to making a difference. She found herself contributing to conversations, offering perspectives from her own experience, feeling valued for her insights rather than judged for her background. But it was during the auction portion of the evening that everything changed. "Our next item," the auctioneer announced, "is a weekend at the exclusive Clearwater Resort, donated by Bellamy Pharmaceuticals." The bidding started at $5,000 and quickly escalated. Amara watched in fascination as casual gestures and subtle nods drove the price higher and higher. "$15,000, called out a woman in diamonds who looked like she spent more on shoes than Amara made in 6 months. "$20,000, came another voice. Amara felt Ronan tense beside her, and she glanced up to see something dark cross his features. Following his gaze, she spotted a man in an expensive tuxedo, his arm around a woman young enough to be his daughter, smirking in their direction. "$25,000, the man called out, his eyes fixed on Ronan with unmistakable challenge. "Do you know him?" Amara whispered. "Business rival," Ronan replied tersely. "The kind of man who thinks everything has a price." "$30,000, Ronan said suddenly, his voice cutting through the ballroom. The bidding continued, tension crackling between the two men like electricity. But what shocked Amara wasn't the escalating dollar amounts. It was the way the other man's eyes kept drifting to her, calculating and dismissive. $50,000, the rival bid, his smile sharp as a blade. The ballroom went quiet. $50,000 for a weekend resort stay was excessive even by these standards. Amara could feel the weight of hundreds of eyes on them, waiting to see how Ronan would respond. $75,000, Ronan said calmly, but his hand found hers under the table, his grip tight. The other man's smile faltered. After a moment that felt like eternity, he shook his head, conceding defeat. "Sold," the auctioneer announced to enthusiastic applause. As the evening wound down, Amara found herself standing on the hotel's terrace, looking out over the city lights. The cool night air was a relief after the warmth of the crowded ballroom. "Regrets?" Ronan asked, joining her at the railing. "About tonight?" "No." She turned to face him, seeing him clearly in the soft glow of the terrace lights. "But I have a question." "Ask it." "That man, the one you were bidding against. This wasn't really about a resort weekend, was it?" Ronan was quiet for a long moment. "No," he admitted finally. "It wasn't." "What was it about?" He looked at her then, his grey eyes intense in the moonlight. "It was about refusing to let someone like him think he could reduce you to a prize to be won." The words hung between them, loaded with implications that made her breath catch. This wasn't about business anymore, wasn't about professional development or educational initiatives. This was about something deeper, more dangerous. And as they stood there in the soft darkness, neither of them speaking but both feeling the shift that had just occurred, Amara realized that some lines, once crossed, changed everything that came after. Some conversations change everything, even when they're built on the foundation of what isn't said. Monday morning arrived with the kind of autumn chill that warned of winter's approach. Amara stood outside the penthouse building, her hand hovering over the security keypad, trying to summon the courage to go inside. The weekend had been a blur of Zara's excited chatter about the gala, replaying every moment, every conversation, every stolen glance between her and Ronan on that moonlit terrace. The elevator ride felt eternal. Each floor that passed brought her closer to a conversation she wasn't sure she was ready to have. Friday night had changed something fundamental between them, shifted the careful balance they'd maintained. The way he'd looked at her when he'd said those words about not letting anyone reduce her to a prize, there had been nothing professional about that moment. The penthouse was quiet when she entered, unusual for a Monday morning. Ronan's coffee cup sat untouched on the kitchen counter, his laptop closed on the dining table. She found him standing on the balcony, still in his running clothes, staring out at the city below. "You're early," she said, sliding the glass door open. He turned, and she was struck by how tired he looked. Couldn't sleep. The gala was that exhausting? No. He ran a hand through his disheveled hair. The gala was complicated. She joined him at the railing, maintaining careful distance even as every instinct told her to move closer. Because of what happened with that man. The bidding? Because of what I realized during the bidding. His voice was quiet, thoughtful. "Amara, I need to be honest with you about something." Her stomach clenched. "Okay. When I offered you that job, when I invited you to the gala, I told myself it was about work, about giving you opportunities you deserved." He turned to face her fully. But somewhere along the way, it stopped being about work. The words hung between them, dangerous and honest. "Ronan, let me finish, please." He took a breath. "I don't know when it happened. Maybe it was that first dinner at your house. Maybe it was watching you navigate the grocery store like you were solving world hunger. Maybe it was seeing you hold your own with senators and CEOs on Friday night. But somewhere in there, I stopped seeing you as my employee and started seeing you as you." "And what does that mean?" she asked, though her heart was already racing with the answer. "It means I'm in an impossible situation, because I'm your boss, and that creates a power dynamic that makes anything between us inappropriate. But it also means that every time I look at you, I see someone extraordinary, who has no idea how extraordinary she is." Amara felt her carefully constructed walls beginning to crumble. "This can't happen. I know. There are rules about this kind of thing. Policies. I could lose my job. I know. And even if there weren't, we're from completely different worlds. You saw how those people looked at me on Friday night." "I saw how you impressed them," he corrected. "I saw you speak with more intelligence and insight than people who've been working in that field for decades. I saw you belong in that room more than half the people who've been attending those events their whole lives. That's not the same thing as belonging in your world." "What if it could be?" The question was soft, tentative, but it hit her like a physical blow. "What are you asking me?" "I'm asking what you want, Amara. Not what's practical, not what makes sense, not what other people expect. What do you actually want?" The honesty in his voice broke something open inside her chest. When was the last time someone had asked her what she wanted? When was the last time she'd even allowed herself to want something beyond the next bill payment, the next crisis averted? "I want," she started, then stopped. The words felt too big, too dangerous to speak aloud. "Tell me." "I want to not be afraid," she said finally. "I want to believe that sometimes good things happen to people like me without there being a catch. I want to trust that when someone sees something in me, it's real and not just charity." "And do you trust that?" She looked at him, really looked, saw the vulnerability in his eyes, the way his hands gripped the balcony railing like he was anchoring himself. This wasn't the polished businessman making a calculated move. This was a man who'd been just as caught off guard by these feelings as she had. "I'm starting to," she admitted. Relief flooded his features. "The job offer stands, regardless of anything else between us. You should interview for it because you're qualified, because it's a good opportunity, because it would be a crime to waste your potential cleaning houses when you could be changing communities. And if I take it, then we figure out how to do this right. We talk to HR, we make sure everything is above board, we navigate the complications like adults." He paused, "and we see where this goes." A notification chimed from his phone, breaking the moment. Ronan glanced at it, and his expression shifted, becoming more guarded. "What is it?" "Email from Marcus Webb, the man from Friday night." He showed her the screen, and she could see the subject line, "Interesting development." "What does he want?" Ronan opened the email, his jaw tightening as he read. "He's offering to buy me out, says he's heard I'm getting distracted by personal matters and thought I might want to focus on other pursuits. He's threatening you. He's testing me, seeing if what happened Friday night was a sign of weakness he can exploit." Ronan's voice had gone cold, the businessman reasserting himself. Marcus Webb is the kind of man who sees genuine human connection as a liability. "Maybe he's right," Amara said quietly. "What do you mean?" "Maybe I am a distraction. Maybe this," she gestured between them, "puts you at a disadvantage in your world. Then I'll change my world. The certainty in his voice stopped her cold. You can't mean that. I've spent the last 15 years building a company, accumulating wealth, making strategic moves that looked good on paper but left me empty inside. And then I had dinner in your kitchen and remembered what it felt like to be alive. He stepped closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his gray eyes. So yes, I mean it. If my world doesn't have room for this, for you, then I'll build a new one. Before she could respond, her phone buzzed with a text from Zara. Emergency at school, can you pick me up? The real world crashed back in, reminding her that her life wasn't just about her own wants and fears. She had responsibilities, people depending on her. I have to go, she said, showing him the message. Of course. Is everything okay? Probably just teenage drama, but she gathered her purse, already moving toward the door. Amara. His voice stopped her. Think about what I said. About the job, about us, about what you want. As the elevator descended, carrying her away from that penthouse and back to her real life, Amara couldn't stop thinking about the way Ronan had looked when he'd said he'd change his world for her. Like he meant it. Like maybe, just maybe, some fairy tales were true. But fairy tales, she reminded herself as she hurried toward her car, had a way of forgetting about the complicated realities that existed outside the castle walls. Sometimes the people we love most are the ones who force us to see the truth we've been avoiding. The high school parking lot was nearly empty when Amara arrived, her heart still racing from the conversation on the balcony. She found Zara sitting on the front steps, her backpack clutched against her chest, tears streaming down her face. What happened? Amara asked, dropping to her knees beside her sister. Mrs. Patterson called me to her office, Zara said between sobs. About college applications. She said with my grades I could get into anywhere I want. Full scholarships to state schools, maybe even some private ones. Relief flooded through Amara. That's wonderful news. Why are you crying? Because I can't go. Zara's voice broke on the words. We both know I can't go. The applications alone cost money we don't have, and even with scholarships there are expenses. We'll figure it out, Amara said automatically, the same words she'd been saying for years whenever money became an issue. With what? Zara's voice held an edge of frustration that caught Amara off guard. You're barely keeping us afloat as it is. I see you counting bills at the kitchen table, Mara. I see you skipping meals so I can eat. I know you gave up your own dreams so I could have mine. Your education is the most important thing. What about your education? Zara stood up, pacing in front of the school steps. What about your dreams? When do you get to have something for yourself? I'm fine, Zara. I have everything I need. Do you? Her sister's eyes flashed with something that looked like anger. Because from where I'm sitting, you have nothing. You clean other people's houses. You wear the same 5 outfits. You haven't been on a date in 3 years. And you act like that's noble sacrifice when really it's just fear. The words hit Amara like physical blows. That's not fair, isn't it? Zara wiped her tears, her voice becoming steadier. Mrs. Patterson asked about you today, asked if you ever finished your teaching degree. When I told her you dropped out to take care of me, she looked so sad. She said you were one of the brightest students she'd ever taught. Amara felt her throat tighten. Zara. And then I thought about that man who came to dinner, Mr. Bellamy, the way he looked at you, like you were the most interesting person in the room, the way you looked at him when you thought I wasn't watching. Zara stepped closer. When was the last time you let yourself want something just for you? This isn't about me. Everything is about you. Zara's voice cracked. Don't you get it? I can't be happy knowing you sacrificed everything for me. I can't go to college knowing you're still cleaning houses and pretending that's enough. I can't build my life on the ashes of yours. The silence that followed was deafening. Cars passed on the street beyond the school. Students walked home in groups. Life continued around them, while Amara felt her world shifting beneath her feet. What are you saying? She asked quietly. I'm saying take the job, Zara said. Whatever Mr. Bellamy offered you, take it. And if there's something between you two, stop running from it because you think you don't deserve it. It's complicated. Everything worth having is complicated. Zara sat back down beside her sister. But you know what's more complicated? Living with regret, wondering what might have been if you'd just been brave enough to try. They sat in silence for a while, watching the afternoon shadows grow longer across the empty parking lot. Finally, Amara spoke. I'm scared, she admitted. Of what? Of wanting something and losing it. Of not being enough for his world. Of messing this up and losing everything. The job, the stability, maybe even him. And what if you don't mess it up? Zara asked gently. What if you're exactly enough? What if this is your chance to have the life you've always been too afraid to dream about? That evening, Amara stood in her small kitchen, staring at the business card Ronan had given her weeks ago. Dr. Helena Vance, Human Resources Director, Bellamy Pharmaceuticals, the interview that could change everything. Her phone buzzed with a text from Ronan. Is Zara okay? If you need anything. She stared at the message for a long time before typing back, She's fine. We're fine. Thank you for asking. 3 dots appeared, indicating he was typing, then disappeared, then appeared again. I know I said no pressure about the job, but Amara, you deserve this opportunity, regardless of anything else between us. Another message followed quickly. And for what it's worth, I think Zara is lucky to have you, but I also think you're allowed to want things for yourself. Amara set the phone down, her hands shaking. How did he always seem to know exactly what she needed to hear? She picked up Dr. Vance's card, turning it over in her fingers. On the back, Ronan had written in his careful handwriting, "Sometimes the biggest risk is not taking one at all." Before she could change her mind, she dialed the number. Dr. Vance, this is Amara Hayes. I believe Ronan Bellamy mentioned I might be calling about the educational outreach position. Ms. Hayes? Yes, absolutely. Ronan has told me wonderful things about you. When would you be available for an interview? Tomorrow? The word came out before she could stop it. Perfect. How about 10 o'clock? We can meet in my office, and I'll introduce you to the team you'd be working with. After hanging up, Amara sat in her quiet kitchen, the weight of what she'd just done settling over her. Tomorrow she would walk into a different world, present herself as someone worthy of opportunity, someone with ideas and dreams and value beyond her ability to clean and organize. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was Zara. Heard you on the phone. Please tell me you called about that job. Amara typed back, interview tomorrow at 10. The response was immediate. I'm so proud of you. Mum and Dad would be too. Tears blurred Amara's vision. For so long, she'd carried the weight of being responsible for Zara's future, of making sure her sister had every opportunity. She'd never considered that Zara might be carrying the weight of her sacrifice, that her sister's happiness might depend on her own. As she prepared for bed, Amara thought about Ronan's words from that morning. What do you actually want? For the first time in years, she was ready to find out. And as she drifted off to sleep, she dreamed not of the life she'd been living, but of the life that might be waiting for her on the other side of tomorrow's interview, if she was brave enough to reach for it. She walked into that conference room as a housekeeper and walked out as something she'd never dared to believe she could be. Bellamy Pharmaceuticals occupied 3 floors of a gleaming downtown building, all glass and steel and the kind of modern efficiency that spoke of serious money. Amara stood in the lobby at 9:45 a.m., wearing her best blazer, the one she'd bought for job interviews 3 years ago, and trying to calm her racing heart. The elevator ride to the 15th floor felt like ascending to another planet. When the doors opened, she was greeted by a reception area that was somehow both impressive and welcoming, all warm wood tones and natural light. Ms. Hayes? A woman in her 50s approached with a genuine smile. She had grey-streaked hair pulled back in an elegant bun, and the kind of presence that commanded attention without demanding it. I'm Helena Vance. Thank you so much for coming in. Thank you for seeing me, Amara replied, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. Ronan tells me you have some fascinating insights about community engagement, Dr. Vance said, as she led Amara down a hallway lined with awards and photographs of medical outreach programs. I have to admit I'm curious to hear your perspective. They entered a conference room where 3 other people were waiting. Dr. Vance made introductions. The current outreach coordinator who was being promoted, a program manager from their community partnerships, and the chief operating officer. No Ronan in sight, which was somehow both relieving and disappointing. So, Dr. Vance began once they were all seated, tell us about yourself. For a moment, Amara's mind went blank. How did you summarize a life of making do, of sacrificing dreams for necessity, of learning to be invisible? But then she thought of Zara's words from yesterday, of Ronan's belief in her potential, of the conversations she'd had with senators and non-profit directors at the gala. I understand community needs because I live them, she said simply. For the past 10 years, I've been navigating systems that weren't designed for people like me, educational, healthcare, social services. I've learned how to find resources when they're hidden, how to advocate when you don't have a voice, and how to make a dollar stretch when it needs to feed 2 people. She saw Dr. Vance and the others exchange glances but pressed on. I've also seen how well-meaning programs fail because they're designed by people who've never had to use them. They create barriers when they mean to create access. They assume transportation and childcare, and internet access and a dozen other things that aren't guaranteed for the communities they're trying to serve. Can you give us a specific example? The COO asked. Amara thought for a moment. Last year, the city launched a job training program for single mothers. Great idea, right? Except the classes were only offered during school hours with no childcare provided. The application was 20 pages long and had to be submitted online. And the program required participants to have reliable transportation to 3 different locations across the city. What would you have done differently? Dr. Vance asked, leaning forward with genuine interest. Start by asking the community what they need instead of assuming, Offer childcare or hold classes after school hours. Provide application assistance in multiple languages. Partner with local organizations that people already trust, instead of creating something completely new. The words came easily now, fueled by years of frustration with systems that didn't work. And most importantly, hire people from the community to run the programs, not just as participants, but as leaders. The room was quiet for a moment, and Amara worried she'd been too direct, too critical. But Dr. Vance was smiling. That's exactly the kind of thinking we need, she said. We've been struggling with engagement in some of our health education programs. What would you suggest? For the next hour, they discussed everything from literacy initiatives to healthcare access, from funding strategies to community partnerships. Amara found herself drawing on experiences she'd never thought of as qualifications, navigating the welfare office with her elderly neighbor, helping Zara's classmates understand college financial aid, organizing her building's tenants to get the broken air conditioning fixed. One more question, the program manager said as the interview wound down. This position would involve significant responsibility, budget oversight, strategic planning, representing the company at high-level meetings. Do you feel prepared for that level of professional challenge? It was the question she'd been dreading, the one that forced her to confront the gap between her experience and the role's requirements. But as she looked around the table at these professionals, who'd been listening to her ideas with respect and enthusiasm, she realized something had shifted. 6 months ago, I would have said no, she answered honestly. But recently, someone helped me understand that I've been preparing for this my entire life. I've just been calling it survival instead of leadership. Dr. Vance's smile was radiant. I think we've heard enough, Ms. Hayes, could you wait in my office while we discuss? Sarah will show you the way. Alone in Dr. Vance's office, Amara studied the diplomas and awards on the walls, the photos of ribbon cuttings and community events. This could be her world. This could be her life. The thought was both thrilling and terrifying. 20 minutes later, Dr. Vance returned with an expression Amara couldn't read. Well, she said, settling behind her desk, that was one of the most impressive interviews I've conducted in years. Amara's heart pounded. Thank you. The position is yours if you want it. Starting salary is $65,000, full benefits, and we'll provide tuition assistance for you to complete your education degree while you work. Dr. Vance pulled out a folder. There's just one thing we need to discuss. Here it comes, Amara thought. The catch. The reason it's too good to be true. Ronan recused himself from the hiring decision completely. He wanted there to be no question about your qualifications or our motives, but he did ask me to tell you something. Dr. Vance's expression softened. He said to remind you that you earned this, not because of who you know, but because of who you are. Tears pricked at Amara's eyes. Even absent from the room, Ronan had found a way to address her deepest fears. When would you need an answer? She asked. Take the weekend. But Amara. Dr. Vance stood and extended her hand. I hope you say yes. We need people like you. The community needs people like you. Walking out of the building into the afternoon sunshine, Amara felt like she was moving through a dream. Her phone buzzed immediately, a text from Zara. Well? She typed back, they offered me the job. Her phone rang instantly. Are you serious? Are you taking it? Please tell me you're taking it. I'm thinking about it, Amara said, but she was already smiling. What's to think about? This is everything you've ever wanted. As she walked to her car, Amara realized Zara was right. This was everything she'd ever wanted. Respect, financial security, the chance to make a real difference. But more than that, it was the chance to stop being invisible, to step into a life where her voice mattered. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was Ronan. Helena said it went well. Whatever you decide, I'm proud of you. And as she drove home through the city streets, Amara couldn't stop thinking about how sometimes the biggest changes in life started with the smallest acts of courage, like saying yes to dinner or picking up the phone, or finally believing you deserved more than you'd been settling for. Standing at the crossroads between the life she'd known and the life she could have, Amara discovered that sometimes the hardest person to convince is yourself. Saturday morning found Amara sitting at her kitchen table, the job offer spread out in front of her like a map to a foreign country. The numbers seemed almost fictional. $65,000, health insurance, tuition assistance, more money than she'd ever imagined earning, doing work that actually mattered. So why couldn't she bring herself to sign it? "You're overthinking this," Zara said, sliding a cup of coffee across the table. "This is literally the opportunity of a lifetime." "I know." Amara traced the edge of the contract with her finger. "That's what scares me. What if you're not good enough? What if you fail? What if it's all too good to be true?" Zara's voice was gentle but firm. "Those are just fear talking, Mara, and fear has been making your decisions for way too long." Before Amara could respond, her phone rang. The display showed a number she didn't recognize. "Miss Hayes." The voice was smooth, confident, vaguely familiar. "This is Marcus Webb. I believe we met briefly at the Hartwell Foundation Gala." Amara's blood ran cold. The businessman who'd been bidding against Ronan, who'd sent that threatening email. "Mr. Webb, how did you get this number?" "I make it my business to know things about people who interest me," he said with the casual arrogance of someone accustomed to getting his way. "And you, Ms. Hayes, are very interesting indeed. What do you want?" "I'd like to meet. There are some things about Ronan Bellamy you should know before you make any permanent decisions about your future." "I'm not interested. Did you know he's been investigating you?" Webb's voice cut through her protest like a blade. "Background checks, financial records, even interviews with your former employers. Very thorough for someone who claims to care about you personally." The words hit her like physical blows. "That's not true, isn't it? Ask yourself, Ms. Hayes, how does a man worth hundreds of millions suddenly become interested in his housekeeper? How convenient that he offers you a job right around the time his company needs positive publicity for their community outreach programs." "You're lying." "1 hour, the coffee shop on 5th and Main. Come alone and I'll show you exactly how much Ronan Bellamy values your authenticity." The line went dead. Amara stared at the phone, her hands shaking. "Who was that?" Zara asked, concern evident in her voice. "Someone trying to mess with my head," Amara said, but doubt had already begun to creep in. Had Ronan been investigating her? Was the job offer just another calculated business move? An hour later, despite every instinct telling her not to go, Amara found herself sitting across from Marcus Webb in a crowded coffee shop. He was younger than she'd expected, maybe early 40s, with the kind of aggressive confidence that came from never hearing the word no. "Thank you for coming," he said, sliding a manila folder across the table. "I thought you should see these." Inside were copies of background check reports, financial investigations, even transcripts of conversations with her previous employers, all bearing Ronan's company letterhead, all dated from weeks before he'd ever invited her to dinner. "This is standard procedure for any potential employee," she said, but her voice sounded weak even to her own ears. "Is it?" Webb leaned back in his chair. "Tell me, how many other housekeepers has he offered $65,000 jobs to? How many other employees has he taken to charity galas? What's your point?" "My point is that Ronan Bellamy doesn't do anything without a reason. He's been planning this for months, Miss Hayes. The job, the dinner invitations, even his sudden interest in your personal life, it's all part of a very calculated strategy." "Strategy for what?" Webb's smile was sharp. "Have you looked at his company's stock price lately? Bellamy Pharmaceuticals has been under investigation for price fixing on life-saving medications. They need a public relations miracle. And what's better than a heartwarming story about a millionaire CEO falling for his humble housekeeper and giving her the opportunity of a lifetime?" The folder slipped from Amara's fingers. "You're suggesting he's using me for publicity. I'm not suggesting anything, I'm telling you facts." Webb leaned forward. "In 6 months, when the investigation concludes and the media attention dies down, where do you think you'll be? Do you really believe Prince Charming is going to ride off into the sunset with Cinderella?" Amara stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "I don't believe you." "Then ask him," Webb called after her. "Ask him about the background checks. Ask him about the timeline. Ask him why he's never mentioned the federal investigation into his company." The drive home passed in a blur. Amara's mind raced with questions she didn't want to ask, doubts she didn't want to entertain, but the evidence was there. in black and white. Ronan had been investigating her for weeks before that first dinner invitation. She found herself driving not toward home but toward the penthouse. She still had her keys, still had access. If Webb was lying, she'd confront Ronan directly. If he was telling the truth, the penthouse was quiet when she entered. Ronan's laptop sat open on the dining table, and despite every ethical instinct she possessed, Amara found herself looking at the screen. Email threads about the federal investigation, strategy sessions about image rehabilitation, and there, in a folder labeled Community Outreach Initiative, her own name. Amara? She spun around to find Ronan standing in the doorway, his expression shifting from surprise to concern as he took in her expression. "For you've been investigating me," she said, her voice flat. He went very still. "How did you—" "It doesn't matter how. Is it true?" "Yes, but for how long?" "Amara, let me explain." "How long?" The words tore from her throat, raw with betrayal. 6 weeks, he said quietly. "Before I invited you to dinner, before the job offer, before you decided I'd make good publicity for your company." She backed toward the door, needing distance from him, from this room, from the life she'd almost believed could be hers. "It's not like that, isn't it?" She held up the folder Webb had given her. "Federal investigation, stock prices falling, company image in crisis, and suddenly you discover the poor housekeeper with the heart of gold who just needs someone to believe in her. You think this is all calculated?" His voice was sharp with hurt. "You think I've been manipulating you. I don't know what to think anymore." Tears blurred her vision. "But I know I was right the first time. People like you don't fall for people like me unless there's something in it for them." "That's not true." "Then why didn't you tell me about the investigation? Why didn't you mention that you've been researching my life for weeks? Why does every conversation feel like you know more about me than you're letting on?" The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken truths. When Ronan finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Because I was afraid you'd think exactly what you're thinking right now. Give me one reason to believe this isn't all just an elaborate business strategy." He looked at her for a long moment, and she saw something break behind his eyes. "I can't," he said finally, "because part of it was." The admission hit her like a physical blow. "Get out of my way." "Amara, please, get out of my way." He stepped aside and she ran for the elevator, clutching the job offer that now felt like poison in her hands. As the doors closed between them, she saw Ronan sink into a chair, his head in his hands. And as the elevator carried her away from the penthouse and back to her real life, Amara realized that sometimes the thing that hurt most wasn't discovering that fairy tales weren't real. It was discovering that you'd been living in one all along. 3 days of silence stretched between them like a chasm, until the night when everything that had been broken found a way to heal. The knock on her door came at 8 o'clock on Tuesday evening, soft but insistent. Amara had been sitting in her living room for the past hour, staring at the torn pieces of the job offer scattered across her coffee table. 3 days since the confrontation at the penthouse. 3 days of Zara tiptoeing around her like she was made of glass. 3 days of feeling like the biggest fool who ever lived. She wasn't surprised to find Ronan standing on her porch. What surprised her was how devastated he looked, unshaven, exhausted, his usually perfect composure completely shattered. "I know you don't want to see me," he said before she could speak, "but there are things you need to know, things I should have told you from the beginning. I've heard enough. Please." The word came out broken, desperate. 5 minutes. "If you still want me to leave after that, I'll go and I'll never bother you again." Against her better judgment, she stepped aside to let him in. He moved past her into the living room, seeing the torn contract on the coffee table. Something flickered across his face. Pain, regret, something deeper. "You didn't take the job," he said quietly. "Why would I take a job that was only offered to make you look good? Because it wasn't." He turned to face her, his grey eyes intense with something that looked like anguish. "Amara, everything Marcus Webb told you was true, but it wasn't the whole truth. What's that supposed to mean? Sit down, please." She remained standing, arms crossed, waiting. 6 weeks ago, my company started getting investigated for price manipulation, bad publicity, stock prices falling, everything Webb said. My board suggested a PR campaign to improve our image. He ran a hand through his disheveled hair. They wanted me to find some heartwarming community outreach story, a real person with a real struggle who we could help. Each word felt like a knife twisting in her chest. "So you picked me." "I picked you because you were right there, cleaning my house every day, invisible to me like I was invisible to myself." His voice grew quieter. The background check was standard procedure. I needed to know if your story would work for publicity purposes. And then I read your file, Amara, really read it. Do you know what I found? She said nothing, but tears were already burning behind her eyes. I found a 19-year-old girl who dropped out of college when her parents died in a car accident because someone had to take care of her 17-year-old sister. I found someone who worked 3 jobs to keep them both afloat, who gave up her teaching scholarship to become a housekeeper because it paid more. I found someone who'd been invisible her whole life, not because she wasn't remarkable, but because the world doesn't see people like you. Stop, the word came out as a whisper. I found someone who budgeted down to the penny, who bought generic everything except when it came to her sister's needs, who walked to work when the bus fare got too expensive, who wore the same clothes for years so Zara could have new ones. His voice broke. I found someone who was extraordinary and had no idea. You used me. I was going to use you. The admission hung between them like a confession. That was the plan. Find the perfect story. Offer you some token help. Get the good publicity. Move on. But then you invited me to dinner. He stepped closer, and she could see the exhaustion in his face, the way his hands shook slightly. And I sat at your table and ate your sister's cooking and listened to you laugh, and I realized I hadn't felt human in years. That night, Amara, I forgot about the investigation, about the publicity, about everything, except how it felt to be in a place where someone saw me as just a person. So you kept lying to me. I kept lying to myself. He was close enough now that she could see the tears he was fighting back. I told myself I was helping you because you deserved it. I told myself the feelings were real even if the beginning was calculated. I told myself I could find a way to make it right without telling you the truth. But you couldn't. No, because every day I spent with you, every conversation we had, every moment I saw you doubt your own worth because you thought this was too good to be true. I was the one making it too good to be true. The silence stretched between them, heavy with the weight of everything broken. Why are you telling me this now? She asked finally. Because Webb was right about one thing. You deserve to know the truth, all of it. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded paper. This is my resignation letter. I'm stepping down as CEO. What? The investigation will conclude in a few months. The company will probably pay a fine, make some changes, move on. But I can't move on knowing that I found the most genuine person I've ever met by accident while I was looking for a way to manipulate public opinion. She stared at the letter in his hands. Ronan, the job offer was real, Amara. Helena wasn't part of the original plan. When I saw how perfect you were for that position, I made sure the hiring process was completely separate from me. You earned that job. You impressed those people because you're impressive, not because I told them to hire you. I can't take it now, not knowing how it started. I know. He folded the letter carefully, put it back in his pocket. But I need you to know something else. Something I should have said weeks ago. What? He looked at her then with an intensity that made her breath catch. I love you. Not the story. Not the publicity opportunity, not the project. You, the woman who makes grocery shopping feel like an adventure, who can discuss education policy with senators and then go home and help her sister with chemistry homework, who invited a stranger to dinner because she saw he was lonely. The tears she'd been fighting finally spilled over. How am I supposed to believe that? Because I'm walking away from everything to prove it. His voice was steady now, certain. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm not asking you to trust me again. I'm just asking you to know that what happened between us, the real parts, the feelings, the way you changed my life, that was never part of any plan. What will you do? I don't know. Start over, I guess. Try to become the man who deserved to sit at your dinner table that first night. He moved toward the door, then stopped. Take the job, Amara. You'll be brilliant at it. And maybe someday, when you're changing the world the way I know you can, you'll remember that not everything about us was a lie. He was almost to the door when she spoke. Ronan. He turned, hope flickering in his eyes. That woman you mentioned, the one who raised you when your mother couldn't. What about her? What was her name? Dorothy. His voice was soft with memory. Dorothy Williams. She died when I was 15. Massive heart attack at work. She was cleaning office buildings downtown. Did you ever try to find her family? To thank them? Or help them? Or... I tried for years, but they'd moved. Disappeared into the system. I never found them, he paused. Why? Because that's the difference between calculated kindness and real love. Real love doesn't forget. Real love keeps looking. She wiped her tears with the back of her hand. Maybe it's time you found Dorothy's family. Maybe it's time you honored her memory the right way. He stared at her for a long moment, understanding dawning in his eyes. And maybe it's time I learned to love someone the way she loved me, without agenda, without conditions. Maybe it is. Amara. Her name was a prayer on his lips. Is there any chance, any possibility that someday— I don't know, she said honestly, but I think maybe broken things can be fixed, if both people are willing to do the work. And as he walked out into the night, carrying her words like hope in his chest, Amara realized that sometimes the end of one story was just the beginning of another, one written not in calculated moves and strategic decisions, but in the kind of truth that could only come from two people, brave enough to start over. 6 months later, sometimes the most beautiful endings are really just beginnings in disguise. The community center buzzed with the excited chatter of families gathering for the graduation ceremony. Amara stood at the back of the room, watching as 32 adults walked across the small stage to receive their certificates in basic computer skills, financial literacy, and job readiness training. 6 months ago, this program had been just an idea in a grant proposal. Today, it was changing lives. Ms. Hayes, called Maria Santos, a single mother of 3 who'd been in the first cohort. I got the job. The office position at the medical center. I start Monday. Amara hugged her tightly, feeling the familiar surge of pride and purpose that had become the hallmark of her new life. You earned it, Maria. Every bit of it. As the ceremony wound down, Amara began cleaning up the chairs and collecting the leftover programs. Her phone buzzed with a text from Zara, now thriving in her 2nd semester at the State University. Saw the news article about the program. Mom and Dad would be so proud. Also, did you see who they quoted? Amara frowned, pulling up the local newspaper's website on her phone. There, in the middle of the article about the community center's success, was a quote from Ronan Bellamy, identified as local education advocate and founder of the Williams Foundation. Ms. Hayes has created something truly remarkable here. The quote read, "These programs don't just teach skills, they restore dignity and hope. The community is fortunate to have her leadership." She'd known about the Williams Foundation, of course. News traveled fast in non-profit circles. 6 months ago, after stepping down from Bellamy Pharmaceuticals, Ronan had used his personal wealth to establish a foundation honoring Dorothy Williams' memory. The foundation focused on supporting working families, funding education initiatives, and providing resources for single parents, all the things Dorothy had needed but never received. What Amara hadn't known was that the Williams Foundation had been one of the silent partners helping to fund her program. Thought I might find you here. She turned to find Dr. Helena Vance approaching, a warm smile on her face. Helena, what are you doing here? Board meeting for the Community Foundation. We're discussing next year's grant allocations. Helena glanced around the bustling room. This program has exceeded every expectation we had. The success rates, the community engagement, the long-term impact, it's everything we hoped for when we hired you. It's been the most rewarding work of my life, Amara said, and meant it. Which brings me to why I'm really here. Helena's expression grew more serious. We've been approached about expanding the program statewide. It would mean a significant promotion, more responsibility, and the chance to impact thousands of families instead of dozens. That sounds incredible. It would also mean working closely with our foundation partners, including the Williams Foundation. Amara's heart skipped. I see. You should know the recommendation came from them, anonymous at first, until we pressed for details. They've been tracking your work, documenting your results, advocating for expansion. Helena paused. The foundation director seems to believe you're the only person qualified to lead this initiative. The foundation director, Ronan Bellamy, though he's made it clear that his professional recommendation is completely separate from any personal feelings he might have, he insisted on that distinction. That evening, Amara found herself walking through Riverside Park, the same park where she and Zara used to come as children when they needed to escape their small apartment. The autumn air was crisp, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and the promise of winter. She wasn't surprised when she saw him sitting on their old bench by the pond. She'd been expecting this conversation ever since reading the article. "You've been funding my program," she said, settling beside him but maintaining careful distance. "The Williams Foundation has been funding your program," Ronan corrected gently, "among dozens of others. Don't split hairs with me." He smiled at that, the first genuine smile she'd seen from him since that terrible night 6 months ago. "You're right. I've been watching from a distance, making sure you had the resources you needed to succeed." "Why?" Because I wanted to see what you could do when someone believed in you completely. No strings, no agenda, just support. He looked out over the water. Turns out, you can do everything. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching ducks paddle across the pond as the sun began to set. Helena told me about the expansion opportunity, Amara said finally. It's a good offer. You should take it, even though it means working with you. Especially because it means working with you. He turned to face her and she was struck by how much he'd changed. The corporate polish was gone, replaced by something more authentic, more grounded. I've spent 6 months learning to love without agenda, Amara. Learning to support without controlling. This is your chance to change thousands of lives. I won't let my feelings get in the way of that. And what if I said I wanted them to get in the way? The question hung between them, vulnerable and brave. Ronan's breath caught. What are you saying? I'm saying I've spent 6 months learning to trust my own worth. Learning that I don't need someone else to validate my dreams, but that it's okay to want someone to share them with. She turned to face him fully. I'm saying that what we had, the real parts, the honest parts, maybe they're worth fighting for. Amara, his voice was rough with emotion. I'm saying that if you've really learned to love without agenda, and I've really learned to trust without fear, maybe we can try again. The right way this time. The right way, honest from the start. Equal partners. No saviors, no projects, just two people who see each other clearly and choose to build something together. He reached for her hand, slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. When she didn't, when her fingers interlaced with his smile was radiant. I'd like that, he said. I'd like that very much. As they walked out of the park together, hands clasped, sharing stories of the work they'd been doing and the dreams they still wanted to chase, Amara realized that sometimes the most beautiful love stories weren't about being rescued. They were about two people saving themselves and choosing to share the life they'd built. 6 months later, at their wedding in the community center where Amara's program had started, surrounded by the families they'd helped and the community they served, Ronan's vows would echo the words he'd spoken that first night at her dinner table. In your home I learned to eat, in your love I learned to live, and in our work together I learned that the most important thing we can do is help others remember their own strength. But that night, walking home through the quiet streets, it was enough to simply be two people who had found their way back to each other, not through grand gestures or perfect timing, but through the slow, careful work of becoming worthy of the love they wanted to share. What happens when two broken people learn to heal themselves before trying to heal each other? Could you find the courage to start over if it meant building something real? Your participation in this channel is very important. Please leave your opinion in the comments. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and comment your thoughts. Your participation is very important to us. See you next time.